Right, good day, students. My name is Deborah Akintola, and I'm here with Smart Prep. And I'm going to be taking you through the introduction to FET geography. And basically, we're going to be looking at the big ideas of geography. And yeah, so as you watch the video, do not forget to like, subscribe, share, and share with someone who might be doing with tough as well. And we'll be getting right onto the video. Right. So, what are we going to be talking about in this video? We're going to be looking at the basics of geography, the big ideas of places, spaces, environments, spatial processing. And then we're also going to be looking at the overview of the topics that you'll be doing in grade 12 in geography as well. And then we'll also break down the exam that is done in South Africa so that you have an idea of what is going to come ahead, right? So we'll begin by understanding what geography is all about. And basically, it is the study of the Earth's surfaces. And we look at the features of the Earth, we look at what are the inhabitants, so to speak, and basically understanding the phenomena of both the physical and human aspects. So, one misconception is that geography just looks at the physical, but we also have to understand that the earth doesn't exist in isolation. It involves human beings. And we look at that spatial relationship and we see how that relationship changes over time, right? So it's a very fascinating topic to consider. So, why do we even need to study geography? We need to do this because it allows us to investigate patterns, processes, and interaction across the Earth's surfaces, right? And we're able to also develop critical thinking and spatial awareness and also problem solving. Because if you've looked at media for a while now, we've been talking about climate change and global warming and all those big world challenges, and most of them involve geography. We need to understand how inequality comes into play, how sustainability of not just energy, not just the places of water, and all these limited resources that we have, and how do we engage with this local in South African context and global in the world's context as well, right? So we're going to, again, like I've mentioned before, we're going to talk about the four big areas now, the four big ideas rather. So the first image here is a place, right, where we have place in the earth, and then we also have space, the second image, to your right, and then we have the environment, right, and then lastly we have spatial processes. So, what is place, right? So, a place is basically a specific geographical location, a specific point on the earth, and this usually has meaning identity. So, consider the fact that you were born in a certain location. You have a birthplace, maybe Cape Town, Kruger Park. There's a street sign on this image that has different streets, and it's basically a location. Now, it can also be natural. It can be a place like a river, River Niger. It can be a mountain. It can be human made, like a city. So if I say I come from Johannesburg, that's a location, but it's also human made in the sense that it has been populated and then inhabited by human beings as well. All right. Now the next idea is space. So when we talk about space, we're looking at arrangement and distribution, right? So if you see this map here, we're looking at the arrangement of landmarks, right? We're looking at distance, we're looking at patterns, we're looking at networks, we're looking at the flows of water and all those things, and allows us to see how the places connect to the space around it and the distribution of a different either man-made or natural occurring elements and how those react to each other. So now the third big idea is the environment, right? This involves our surroundings. This can either be natural when we look at things like water and a cliff, or a flow, whatever the case might be, can be natural, sunset, the ocean, all of that. And then we can also have man-made environments where we have amusement parks and things that have been built in, but it's now forms part of the world as we know it. So geography basically explores now the interactions between the humans and nature, as talked about earlier. So we look at things like climate. We look at how our the weather is changing because of pollution, right? So that's a cause and effect in our world. We also look at ecosystems. We look at, for example, the water cycle. We recognize that there's evaporation, there's condensation, and human beings are also playing and play there. And then we look at sustainability of our environment, right? If you recognize that, not just nature, when you look at, for example, a rock, over time erosion can happen there and then that changes, but also human beings can come and bulldoze a rock away. So things like that are at play in our environment. The last idea is the spatial processes. And as I was just talking about in the previous slide, we recognize that our environment is not in isolation. So we have to consider that we have to study how our environment is also changing and the forces that causes it to change with space and time, right? So for example, urbanization, if human beings are moving into a place, there's going to be an effect to that with erosion, as mentioned before, industrialization, flooding. So it can be both man-made and you know environmental changes that occur to affect our environment and therefore our places and our spaces as well, right? So when we study geography, we are able to explain why these changes might occur over time, and then not just explaining why, but then what do we do about it? How do we then, as geographists, how do we then solve these big world problems like overpopulation or flooding and so on and so forth? All right, so now I'm going to be breaking down the National Senior Certificate exams, and this is very important even before you get onto the topics themselves to recognize what is required of you in geography. Like you answer questions in geography different from how you would answer from maths and science, for example. So let's get into that. All right. So what we understand is we have two papers in geography. We have paper one and paper two, right? And they are written on two separate days. So for both papers, we have a 3 hour paper. Both are 3 hour long, and then there's 150 marks, right? And they have two sections with three compulsory questions each, right? So it's two sections. Section A and section B, and then they have three questions in each section, if that makes sense. Um, Yes, and then it's written on different days, so it allows you time to prepare your mind and recuperate for the content ahead. So when we look at paper one, we have section A, as I mentioned, which talks about the first question will look at climate and weather, right? And as we go on with the series of videos, we see the topics that are involved there, right? And it's 60 marks. We have short questions for 15 marks, and then we have three types of sub questions of 15 marks each, right? And that is on climate and weather. So we have 15-mark question, another 15-mark question, and then another one, right? And then next thing we have is geomorphology, right? That's question two. It also has 60 marks, and you have three sub questions of 15 marks each as well. And then the next section or the last section in paper one is map work, right? And this is 30 marks each. And then it's also further broken down rather into map skills and calculations, which are worth 10 marks each. And then you also have map interpretation, which is worth 12 marks. Apologies for that typing error there. And then we look at GIS, which we'll learn about in the series of videos as well, which is worth 8 marks. So again, this is an opportunity for you to not just know your strength in terms of what whether I'm better at theory or at map work, but also trying to get the maximum amount of marks each in each section. And then similarly, we have paper two, which is broken down into it's also a 3 hour paper rather. It's 150 marks as well. And then you also have two sections with three compulsory questions. So always for every exam, try as much as possible to attempt it. Don't leave any question left unanswered, because you never know. You might just get it right. And we're trying to practice and get you to that level where you're confident in your skills for answering geography questions. All right, so for section A in paper two, we have question one, which looks at the rural and urban settlements, right? And this is worth 60 marks. So that's also involved short questions with three sub questions, right? Of 15 marks each, and that looks at rural and urban settlements. And we'll discuss what all these terms are as we go on, so don't get worried about that. And then in question two, we look at the economic geography of South Africa. And as I mentioned, geography is not isolated from human beings. So we look at how the economy is affecting the geography of our country. And then that's also worth 60 marks. And we have short questions and then three sub questions as well. And then we have section B, which is our map work, and this is worth 30 marks. And this involves map skills and calculations as in the same as paper one, but it's going to be slightly different types of questions. But like paper one, we'll test your map skills and do calculations as well. And then we'll do map interpretation for 12 marks and then GIS for 8 marks. So a lot of people tend to lose marks on map work because it is quite technical, but there is a mechanism or a technique of making sure that you're getting the maximum amount of marks for each of those sections. All right, so just for a quick overview of the type of questions that you can expect short objective questions. So multiple choice, again, do not leave any multiple choice unanswered. Like if it comes to it, you can guess intellectually, you can eliminate, and then pick your best answer. And then you can also have matching questions, and then we have data response questions where you'll be given a map, for example, and you have to extrapolate an answer from that, or you would be given a diagram, whatever the case might be, and you'd have to interrogate that piece of information that you have and then answer questions based on that. And lastly, we have paragraph type questions. And importantly, with geography, you as we do more question papers, recognize that there are words, for example, explain, define, describe, those are requiring certain things from you. So for example, if it asks you something, you have to look at the number of marks as well. If it's worth 5 marks, then you cannot write a sentence and expect the full mark. So you not just state a fact, you also have to be able to explain the fact and explain how you got your answer. So the more you practice question papers, the more you'll be able to see how you best go around it and what the examiner is looking for. And then there's also three different levels or cognitive levels of questioning, where we have lower level, which is 25% of the question. So this is your basic like multiple choice, your matching, true or false, whatever the case might be. That's your lower level. And then middle level or middle order questions would be 50% of the paper. And this is where you are thinking a bit more. You're using your data to answer the questions. And then higher level is where you're using your reasoning. So you wouldn't necessarily be able to find the answer from the text or from the piece of evidence that is given to you, but you would have to be able to reason things out and then explain for that. So a lot of this is basically graded slowly and then surely. So you're able to at least get 75% from both the lower level and middle order level questions before you get to our higher order level questions for the A plus plus. All right, so now when we look at the content, this is just a brief overview. If you look through your textbook or whatever piece of information you're also using, you'd be able to see more of this. So again, we will be looking at map work, and this is a very important skill in geography. Like as you can see, it exists in both paper one and paper two. So when you look at a map, which would be a physical paper in an exam, you should be able to recognize the landmarks that are on the map, be able to look at contours and concave and convex and all these other shapes from the maps. You'll be able to do calculations of distance, of gradient, and vertical exaggeration, all these things, and then you'd be able to get information. Even when you look at Google Maps, for example, you're able to know you're not like how many 15 kilometers or distance from a certain place, right? And then we'll also go into the weather and climate systems. Again, we'll be looking at what affects our weather and the different climates of different locations. And as we look at that, we'd be able to have you get an appreciation basically of when we say it's raining, and what does that mean? When it's sunny, what does that mean? And why is it? What causes certain weather conditions and climates in certain regions? And then we move on to the water cycle, and then look at how rivers are formed. And again, with the water cycle, you begin to have an appreciation for things like evaporation, condensation, and how water is used in our system and in our ecosystem, and how it fits into all of life. And then we'll look at rivers and field work, right? We'll look at how rivers affect and flow, the type of flow, the rushing of the waters. Again, we'll go on to oceans and coastal systems and be able to have an appreciation of um, this big ocean and see like how coastal regions are affected as a result of their proximity to the ocean and all of that. And then, and lastly on the slide, we will look at human populations. Again, looking at urbanization and ideas of how migration happens and how human beings have a role to play in the environment that they're in, and how even within a certain context, they can influence the world that they are in, and how ideas are shared among people, and again the economic geography of our country. Right, again, moving on, we'll also be looking at our settlements and urban geography, as I mentioned in the previous slide. And we'll also look at economic development. When we say an area is developed, what does that look like and what does that mean? We'll also look at agriculture and farming, and because, again, we are in South Africa, that's a very big part of our world, and we'll look at minerals and energy and how we get electricity and all those other fundamental resources that we need in our world. And then we'll look at field work last and foremost. All right, so I hope this series of slides and have gotten you excited for what is to come in geography, and this is just the beginning of your journey. As you begin to walk around, your environment and places, begin to recognize little things and imagine, like, why is this rock there, and how do we explain the water flow and the water cycle and all of that, and you begin to recognize that you cannot understand the world that you are in unless you understand geography and geographical principles. The next time you use Google Maps, just recognize, oh, what skill do I know now? Do I know my north, my east, my west, and yeah, begin to explore. And yeah, thank you for watching this video. Do not forget to like, share, subscribe, and get excited for the next videos. And yeah, see you next time. Bye.